Welcome back to Will I Ever Learn Chinese? I'm Jeanette Sekel. And in this final episode, I'm talking about how I would learn any language and what I would do differently if I was to learn Chinese again. In this podcast series, I've told you about my Chinese learning journey, and I hope you enjoyed it. Now, at the end, I want you to leave with some advice that will, I hope, at least help you in your own learning. How would I approach learning a language? And how would I approach learning Chinese again, now that I've had the experience of learning Chinese? Would I do the same again? Well, before I delve into that, I just want to say that the most important thing for me, I have learned, is to take it easy and to keep my motivation going. I know that if I continue to work on a language, I'll learn. All learning takes time, and I have to be kind to myself. I have to keep motivated. And if something isn't fun, I'll let it go. I'll find some other way to learn that language that I think is more fun. I'll read comics rather than learning grammar rules. And I do love grammar. So, what to do to learn any language? This is my advice. First of all, there needs to be that initial spark. You get interested in a language. That's either because you hear something about it, you find a book about it, you know a speaker, any reason really. Well, any reason other than you have to do it at school. And if there is that reason you have to do it at school, try to find that spark. That's the first step. You're curious. Can you learn this language? Well, the answer is yes. Next, try to find out more about your language. What materials are there? Search the web, look for beginner materials. Some minority languages might have free courses developed by their local organizations. Some big languages may have a lot of different materials. Some are free and some are paid for. Find out which materials there are and which hurdles to learning the language you may have in the way. Is it a very small language spoken in a remote area of the Brazilian Amazon? You might have to travel there and live there in order to learn the language. Are you willing to do that? Are the speakers willing to host you? Are there different varieties of the language? Which variety do you want to learn? Maybe one has more materials or has a wider usage. Think about your choices, but don't fret about them. You can always change your approach, or even the language variety you're learning later. Next, think about your preferred learning environment. Do you like to learn in a class? Or could you potentially work with your own teacher or with a language exchange partner? Or do you prefer to study entirely on your own at first? You can search online for learning programs, classes and teachers. And these days you can very easily do remote work over the internet with a teacher or even with a class. Just search for Find a Teacher online and you'll get a range of programs where language tutors offer their services. Next, it's important to consider your learning style. Think about which learning style works for you, and then find materials, teachers or classes that suit you. Some languages will have the luxury that I experienced with Chinese. There's going to be lots and lots of stuff. There's so many different materials. There's so much choice that you couldn't possibly do everything. In other languages, there is very little. But in any case, it's a good idea to know what's out there, and then weighing up modern approaches, such as apps and other programs, against the more traditional learning books. Think about your needs and what you know about the language. Like I did with Chinese, is it difficult to pronounce? And in that case, it may be a good idea to use a method that teaches you the sounds first. How much grammar teaching do you want or need? Do you want to learn through another language, such as with English translations? Think about these questions to begin with, as it will help you choosing the right method. You don't have to have ready answers to any of these questions, really, and don't worry if you have never thought about them. Just go with one or two of the learning programs or classes to start with. And if choosing a learning program, have a look at the different programs on offer and maybe take up a trial or so in a few programs or apps that appeal. Settle on one or two and stick with them to begin with. If you're working with a teacher, book a trial session to see if you're getting along. It's good to use one main learning method at first to learn some of the basics, but then constantly reflect on your own learning and try out other methods along the way. As long as you stick with one or two introductory methods that suit you, You will learn some basics on which you can then build. If you're having fun while you're doing it, continue doing it. If what you're doing is demotivating you, find another learning program. Chances are that what you've learned to date will work in the other program, and you can just use another method that appeals to you more. Next, I would also start to have a separate notebook and a vocabulary list. It's a good idea to see if there's any online materials for that particular language, maybe an online dictionary that may even have a flashcards feature. Otherwise, there are various ways in which you can build your own flashcards online. Do spaced repetition, so go through the vocabulary and then the stuff that you have learned, repeat it again after a week or so to ensure that you're learning it again and that it sticks. Take lots and lots of notes when you're speaking to teachers, when you're out there seeing some Chinese characters somewhere and so on. Notes are brilliant because you can go over them again and again reinforce what you've learned. It is important to evaluate your learning as you're going along, and especially after a few weeks after you first started. How are you getting on? Is there anything you're not learning properly in your current setup? Do you need to add another app or learning program or other method? Do you maybe not get on with the method at all? Maybe it's time to give up that method? As long as you're still motivated to learn the language, try something different, but find out what motivates you as you're doing this. Do you feel that you're progressing? Some learners I know love looking through lists like the 100 most common words and then the 1,000 most common words in the language to get a good vocabulary basis. But you don't have to do this, and, well, I have one of those books, but I only find it marginally useful. Make adjustments and play around. And do what suits you. Do you. If things go smoothly and you're motivated, great, continue. Note down approaches that look like they could be useful later, when you have some more proficiency. Try to build the language into your daily life and spend as much time as possible immersing yourself in the language. This is by actively learning, but also passively letting the language wash over you. Start to find resources in your target language, such as music and films, television, podcasts, audiobooks, recipe books, anything you might find interesting. Start watching movies with subtitles, if there are movies with subtitles, when you first start learning the language to get used to the sound. And then start to recognize expressions you've learned. Try to find materials of different types, some that you may find easy to understand, such as podcasts or videos aimed at beginners, and others that may be slightly more difficult at a slightly higher stage, but that you're enjoying nonetheless, such as music or films with subtitles. Gradually learn song lyrics. Look up potentially useful expressions in a dictionary and note them down as you learn them. Depending on your personality, start speaking to people. If you don't like speaking to people, especially when you're not very good in a language yet, then at least speak to yourself in your head. Or speak out loud, speak to your cat. As long as there's nobody around to judge you. But eventually, once you feel that you can speak a little, try to go out there and find speakers. If you're shy, finding a language teacher who can talk to you exclusively in your target language is a really great way. And that way you can meet with them once or twice a week. It really encourages you to use the language. And I found that online teachers work very, very well. You don't have to necessarily be able to meet in person. Overall, continue to add to your learning methods, finishing some and then adding new ones. Try to do the learning alongside other things. So listen to podcasts while you're driving or you're doing menial tasks, and find films that you can watch even when you're very tired. You'll be surprised by how much you will understand eventually and how much you will learn this way. And finally, remind yourself that there will be ups and downs. And language learning is just like that. There will be times when you feel on top of the world and other times when you feel that you can't speak the language at all. Just continue on your journey. You'll get better. You're doing great. Compare yourself to yourself. Look at where you were a week ago, a month ago, a year ago, and then see how far you have progressed. And altogether, be kind to yourself. So, how would I learn Chinese should I have to start again? Well, I would probably do it in a very, very similar way in hindsight. And not much different from what I ended up doing. My main focus would be to maintain my motivation all the way through. I would again use an audio image learning program, a sort of gamified learning program that looks appealing. And this time from the beginning, rather than a few weeks in when I realized I had to, I would also start using a program to learn the Chinese characters. So I would use a program that focuses on the sound and teaches me some of the language. And then I would use a program that teaches me exclusively how to write from the very basics up. And for the writing program, I would look at a wide range of online resources because there are so many free resources. And if none of the free resources appeal, well, I would pay for an app. I would continue with my mixing up of different approaches and do some writing, some listening, some reading, some speaking. And when tired of one approach, or maybe even tired of one program, I would move on to another. I would start to explore the language in its various settings, and again, through watching television, through online platforms. I would start listening to beginners' podcasts, possibly earlier than I started listening to podcasts when I learned Chinese. But still, I would try to engage with the language as much as I could, as long as it motivated me. And I would possibly look for others who are learning Chinese early on, even though, in a way, I think the time I went to my meetup group was probably the right time, because I was ready to have basic conversations. And even though they didn't go so well in the beginning, I soon picked up and soon was able to join in. Maybe if I hadn't been quite so proficient at the stage when I first joined the meetup group, I wouldn't have come back. Who knows? What I found extremely useful and only realized in hindsight was that when listening to other learners who are slightly better than you can be really useful in finding out their strategies for speaking the language fluently, or at least coherently, and to copy their strategies, learn from other learners. And if ever in doubt, there are a range of artificial intelligence programs that you can readily ask. You can say, oh, there's a word that sounds a bit like this, probably means something like this, what could it be? And chances are that AI will come back with a really good answer. So, now in hindsight, was it worth learning Chinese? Oh, absolutely. Would I do it again? Oh yes, absolutely. And I do want to learn more. And I want to get even better at Chinese. And I also want to get better at some of the languages I already speak. I want to learn other languages. For me personally, learning never stops. And there's still so much to learn, and I'm so keen to learn it. So why learn languages? Why learn Chinese? Is Chinese actually a good language to learn? Well, there are language attitudes, and obviously there is prejudice and then other aspects of language attitudes. One of the comments I got was, "Wieso Himmels Willen lernst du das?" Why on earth would you learn that in German? And this was admittedly not the first time that one of my relatives had asked me this question. The first time was probably when, as a teenager, I started to join an elective course in Russian at school, which in the 1980s was quite a controversial choice for a West German, as I was. And this took a lot of effort. The elective was scheduled at 7 a.m., so this was way before the regular school day started at 7:45 a.m., It's very early, and teenagers don't like getting up early. Well, I didn't. But I was very much motivated to learn the language. I thought the language was interesting. It had a different writing system. But ultimately, it was the intense backlash I got from older generations that was enough to keep me going with great enthusiasm for another 2 years. Because as a teenager, provoking certainly gave me a sense of freedom and achievement. I have grown up and no longer feel that I need to provoke others in my language learning choices, but hearing others' perspectives can be a great measuring stick for what part of the general public consider as worthy languages, those that we should learn, and those that we shouldn't. For Chinese, it was interesting because there were those attitudes of, why would you learn that? But then on the other hand, there were the attitudes of, wow, this is a great language to learn because it's good for business. And obviously the attitudes of, wow, this is one of the most difficult languages in the world. Will you be able to learn that? I heard a lot of people say that, oh, children should all learn Chinese in school to trade with China. But when many of my friends and colleagues asked me why I was learning Chinese, I didn't always have a ready answer. Well, the immediate answer would be, Oh, because I'm collaborating with Chinese universities and I want to learn the language. But I was now at a stage where learning Chinese meant so much more than my initial spark. Communicating with my colleagues at Chinese universities was already possible in English, so in a way this wasn't an inherent reason for learning Chinese as such, but rather I had started to learn Chinese because I was enjoying the learning process. I didn't really have a goal with Chinese, it just kept going. Then it transformed into being able to speak the language, and then it turned into I want to speak the language really well. So my secondary goals, or my goals as such, progressed as I was learning the language. All of a sudden, being able to watch and understand television dramas without subtitles became a goal. I couldn't have anticipated this before. I also enjoyed playing Chinese songs on my guitar and singing along. My long-suffering family and wider relations and friends noted that Chinese was yet another language I was learning. I think they have long since given up on commenting on the languages I speak or learn, but I think they're also slightly proud.